Hello, loves. It is I, the Stitch, Peak Petty. Um, if you are watching this, you've either enjoyed my, or found useful, my What Fandom Racism Looks Like essay on cultural appropriation in K pop, which primarily focused on blackness, as I am black. Um, One of the core reasons for me writing this, aside from feeling very strongly about how blackness is used across K-pop to add this air of like edgy, cool, streetwise shit, um, was TK Park of Ask a Korean fame, who did a whole ass essay in January, which you can see right there, January 28th, 2019, called K-pop in the age of cultural appropriation. That's why my essay is cultural appropriation in the age of K-pop, because, well, a lot of people have actually expressed like a desire to like kind of go over this article that TK Park has done, but like reading it, they feel would just like make them lose it. And as somebody who literally almost caused a minor car accident by screaming about this article, like out of nowhere, I was in my friend's car and I was like, oh my God, I need to scream about this anti black bullshit, while we were driving in Florida, which is already like worrying. I understand that desire to know something, but then not really consume it directly, which is why I made it really awesome for you guys, where you click and you don't give him any views because archive links, bitches. Um, So I'm going to be extra awesome and go through his K-pop in the Age of Cultural Appropriation article and talk about the things that I found really immediately problematic and anti-black about it. Starting with the Edward Said quote from Culture and Imperialism at the top. So you may have noticed if you read my essay, the first part, it opens with an Edward Said quote from, I believe, Orientalism. Um, And the whole thing is that TK Park uses Saeed's quote here to kind of set up the tone of his argument. That he's arguing that Americans, who are really black Americans, because let's be very real here, white Americans primarily do not care about cultural appropriation, especially of blackness. So there weren't like droves of white people being like, hey, is this cultural appropriation in your article? Like, or K-pop has cultural appropriation in it, stop it. It was black people. But he doesn't want to be called anti-black, so he goes with Americans. But we're not we're not incapable of nuance and understanding subtle sly digs at us. So he uses this Edward Said quote, and I'll read it. We created them. We taught them how to speak and think. And when they rebel, they simply confirm our views of them as silly children, duped by some of their Western masters. So he uses this quote as a weapon. It's a weapon as a hammer to bash black readers, black people back into place. He is comparing us implicitly with our oppressors, which are shared oppressors, TK Park, are white people. Like, um, So he opens his article with his, I guess, thesis statement, his conclusion. This being the internet, I will state my conclusion first, in the vain hope that it would be impossible for the reader to miss the point of this post. The idea of cultural appropriation is inapplicable to K-pop, because applying the concept of cultural appropriation ignores the historical context in which K-pop arose and developed. I'm just gonna quick pause here to point out that he ignores the historical context in which hip hop in the United States arose and developed. Like, it's a very self-centered post, and I can say that because I'm the youngest of like 11 million kids. So like self-centered is practically my middle name, but he aside from not knowing what cultural appropriation is or why it's problematic, TK Park is a muumuu who doesn't understand the actual thing people seem to pay him to write, because he did, with Youngdae Kim, A Brief History of Korean Hip Hop, which is linked down here. Also an archive link, betches. Just saying. So, from the start, it is clear that TK Park's real conclusion is that Black people have no right to feel things. That's his actual conclusion. Um, at all. That's his conclusion, that we have no right to feel things. Um, let's see. Let's go with the highlighted bits. While the article was on the whole well received, two significant objections were raised. One, the article did not refer at all to the idea that Korean hip hop engaged in a cultural appropriation of African American hip hop artists. And two, by arguing that BTS no longer refer back to American hip hop and worry about how their music measured up to the original, as they had plenty of precedents within Korean hip hop itself. The article did not give proper credit to the real influence of American hip hop that is affecting the Korean hip hop artists today. Um, in my notes, so I'm going to kind of tackle this from the end up. So, in my notes for this overarching project on anti Blackness in Korean hip hop, Korean pop, and industry fandom spaces, right? I actually have a note about a recent artist whose name I've written down, but I don't have that notebook at hand, whose actual beat and flow mimicked a Playboy Cardi song. Like, it was pretty much direct copying. Um, I can totally hear my phone ringing. It's really fucking funny. Um, the idea that these dudes aren't like BTS doesn't need to pull from American hip hop directly. And it's not because there are plenty of Korean hip hop artists today. Um, that's actually not why BTS isn't needing to like rip off or rip from Korean hip hop artists. It's because they've grown as artists and they figured out their own original style. They figured out what beats they like best. They understand culture. They understand producing better. So they don't have to pull from that. But plenty of other artists do. So like even if BTS pulling from um, is not pulling from Black American artists, plenty of other Korean hip hop and pop artists are directly influenced by what is popular in Black hip hop in America. So BTS is the standard. It's cool. I love BTS, but in the context of like his whole thing is that he referenced BTS and saying that they no longer refer back to American hip hop, except that they constantly do reference their admiration for and influences taken from American hip hop. I mean, like all the fucking time. Rapline in particular, but also he does not hide that he does really love rap music and he loves American hip hop, you know? But okay, so the issue with his article, so this is point one, so I'm going back up. So that was two, this is one. So where he says the article did not refer at all to the idea that Korean hip hop engaged in a cultural appropriation of African American artists. I mean, I think it's pretty disingenuous to do a whole article. I mean, it's not that long. I've literally written longer emails to my boss. I mean, literally Friday, right? It's not a long article. So, of course, I understand that it may have started out longer, they may have cut things, that Youngdae Kim's experiences with Korean hip hop might have been different. So I understand that things get cut across the editing process. But the article doesn't just not refer to the idea that Korean hip hop engages in cultural appropriation of African American hip hop and hip hop artists. it ignores that that's kind of what the industry is built off of, that a lot of these rappers, their idea of authentic hip hop is this hood shit that they have no access to. And even Jay Park, um, and other rappers who grew up in the United States, they didn't grow up where I'm currently living. They're not literally from the hood. A lot of these people, their experiences with blackness and with black people come second or third hand. It comes after they've already formed their ideas of what Black people are like from their communities and from entertainment, which then becomes really anti Black because how do your people talk about Black people? But historically, I mean, K pop's not a very long, like old genre. You know, um, my sister is older than modern K pop. I mean, entirely. I might be older than modern K pop if we're counting Sauteji, because I was like, maybe? I'm not even sure because I was born in 90, and the big performance that like a lot of people count as that like birth of Korean pop is 92. But like it's not an old genre. So it doesn't have a history of its own. It pulls from Black American history. And wow. So TK Park thankfully makes it really clear that he's not speaking for Youngdae Kim across his essay, which is like, thank God, because you're so wrong across this essay. I'd feel bad. Um, he's such a butthole. If you're listening to this, TK Park, I think you're a butthole. Just letting you know. Um, right. Next selection. So he's going to go through and like explain why we're wrong for having feelings about how blackness is commodified, portrayed, represented, talked about, blah blah blah, in Korean pop. He's wrong, but whatever. As to the first objection, the idea of cultural appropriation is in opposite to K-pop. Below, I will explain further why this is the case. The second objection is a simple misread, as the point of the article is not that BTS or Korean or any other Korean hip hop artist cease to look to the US hip hop altogether, but that they stopped using US hip hop as the golden standard to which they must measure up. In fact, again, still not necessarily true. Not necessarily. Yet both objections are related in that they stem from the same source: ignorance about the historical context in which K pop emerged and the imperial arrogance that thinks Korean hip hop has no existence outside of the US influence. Wow. Um, this is one of the first references that TK Park makes connecting Black USians with US white USian imperialism, and I mean, there's room to talk about the role that Black people, Black soldiers, and military officials had in the Korean War and in other US forms of US military conflict because we are complicit at points. We are participants. It doesn't matter necessarily why we were in the military, that we were and that our presence negatively impacted people that deserve to have their life free of imperialism. But like he's framing it as this is part of that arrogance, us going, well, look at this racist anti-black shit. Can we talk about it? Also, like, can you at least throw us a significant bone when you're referencing the history of Korean hip hop? Um, so here he has a registration card for Korean musicians to play for a USFK club. This is from 1960. Um, both of my parents are significantly older than this card. Wow. Um, So he brings up his conclusion again because he doesn't think we can fucking read. And I'm really bad at selecting stuff. I'm used to using a Mac at work, so when I come home to use this computer, I'm like, fuck. Once again, conclusion first. K pop is a product to imperialism by the West, and in particular the United States. Understanding this feature of K pop must be the foundation of all intellectual endeavors assessing various aspects of Korea's popular music. So, like, It's not necessarily that he is 100% wrong, but that he's like 80% wrong. He really shortens that path from like A to B in order, like it's actually A to D, right? So it's a path from the letter A to the letter D, and he cuts out B and C to say that there's a straight shot. Like there's literally a history connecting back to like Japanese colonialism, and imperialism, and that influence. But at the end of the day, like his whole thing is about hip hop. Really, it is about hip hop. So whether or not it's his goal, and I doubt it is, he winds up framing this whole argument as if like during the Korean War, black GIs came with boomboxes and hip hop and forced Koreans to listen to it. And this whole thing where non-black people act as if black people are responsible for a lot of fucked up shit is like really messed up. Well, we saw it most recently this past weekend with a Latina writer responding to the 1619 Project, which is about the 400 years of blackness between the first slave in 1619 and now, with like what about these other people, uh black white binary, and it's like, dude, stop. Hypervisibility isn't a privilege, and black people deciding to like push back, to use some of the visibility that is trained on us, to talk about what's happening to us and what has always happened to us, isn't a good thing. I mean, as in, it's not a thing that's taking away from Latinas. It's not taking away from Koreans. Um, Jesus, I fucking hate this dude. So this was the whole Korean War part where he lays out some facts, and the Korean War is horrifying. I mean, war is horrifying. And I'm as violent pro violence as like I can be. And I think war is one of the most horrifying and pointless things ever. You can read this for yourself, like pause and like go through this. Um, like I'm not going to argue with TK Park about the facts of the Korean War or the unnecessariness of US imperialism or interference worldwide, because fuck the US. Duh. Um, so his whole thing is that because Koreans in the 1960s were forced to, Korean musicians and anybody interested in an entertainment career were forced to perform for the GIs, who were primarily white, let's be very real here, but we're also listening to repackaged blackness already. Like if you've seen Dreamgirls, or what is that movie? Hairspray, you know that black performers' music was often repackaged, given to white performers, and reperformed, right? So while there were popular black musicians, I mean, my mom was in her 20s. No, that's a lie. My mom was like 12 in 1960. Um, but the music my mom listened to in terms of black artists, in terms of who she knew, like literally knew, when she lived in New York in the 60s, those people, their music was, of course, traveling across the Pacific and with the GIs, and was part of what they wanted to hear repackaged. And actually, this sentence stands out at me. Sorry. However, well, hold on. It starts up here. I'm gonna fucking To Koreans, the American way of life and American music became beautiful and desirous. They became alienated from their own artistic history and tradition as the United States, became Koreans' mental home. However, this did not mean Koreans were no more than hapless victims after the war, having no agency to shape their contemporary culture. That's actually something that I find really interesting, because he kind of sets it up like that's how that was, that Koreans couldn't help but get invested in hip hop, in jazz, in whatever, because US imperialism. Like he sets that up. And then he's like, but actually, like, it's not that TK Park makes zero valid points, especially about the Korean War itself. And I already went over this, but really? Um, but so like up to this part, this is part three. So up to this part, I think I get where he's coming from. But like after this, right? Felt edgy and boys. I was 5 when this came out. So after this point, you see the truth behind why he's doing this. It's not about a handful of Black Americans criticized him. It's because when 1997, when he tried to get his high school classmates in California to listen to his music, he put on Souteji and Boys, and they were like, bitch, right? Like, so if not for his slip, if not for him including this, right, where you see that it's literally a bitterness towards Black and probably Latino Americans who met his attempt at reintroducing them to rap, to hip hop, um, with mocking, because like how you gonna teach us, how you gonna reintroduce us to our own music, you know? Um, that's what fueling him, his internalized anti-blackness. And like, but some part of him will always honestly be that teenager in 1997 wishing he could be cool for sharing Southedgian Boys, and then realizing that in 2019 the most popular boy group um is a Korean boy band, and like everyone, like my 71-year-old mother knows who BTS is. She likes their music. She's watched their performances on variety shows, on the late night shows here, you know. So like everyone knows something about Korean pop music, and most people feel positively or neutrally about it. And it's cool to be into K-pop in many different spaces. There are communities worldwide that are dedicated to sharing, consuming, loving K-pop. And he will always be that kid in 1997 who tried introducing Southedgian Boys to other people and got like laughed at. And he was not cool because of it, clearly, you know? And it's fascinating to me that I don't think he realizes how transparent this is, you know? Um, but it follows him. He literally says it. This experience would follow me long after I left high school. The dismissive mockery came every time I would write about Korean pop music, about how everything in K-pop was derivative, if not outright plagiarized, and the whole pop music industry in Korea is nothing but Koreans trying to be like Americans and failing. Um, a lot of Korean pop music is incredibly derivative. Um, I talked about this, I don't even remember when, but the promo for ITZY's Icy. So they have the different members of the girl group with little promo videos, maybe 30 seconds long, and Leah's had the beat from Partition, from Beyonce's Partition. And I mean, of course, music is derivative, life is derivative, there are no original ideas. But when um, people call K-pop derivative, it's usually because someone like TK Park is probably trying to be like, they came up with this on their own, sprung completely originally out of YG's head or JYP's head. Like, whoa. So I think he's like, so under here he's like, today, the volume of mockery got much lower as the aesthetics and creativity behind Korean pop music became undeniable. Beauty sets the trend, which dictates its own course, because we're shallow bitches, I guess. Um, Now that the aesthetic force behind Korean pop cannot be laughed off, I am now seeing a different kind of assault against K-pop. That Koreans are not making music the right way, sanctioned by the Black Americans who originated the culture. The charges of cultural appropriation come in this context, and they tend to come when discussing hip hop, the genre that obsessively focuses on authenticity and keeping it real. Do you smell the disdain? Do you smell it? It smells musty. It smells supremely musty. Um, how are you going to write about hip hop if you don't know anything about hip hop? Like, and clearly aren't putting effort into learning about hip hop while you're doing this. Like, how are you doing this, TK Park? How are you such a moo? Um, Previously, when I introduced the pioneers of Korean hip hop, dude, that's French, right? Jinisan, Drunken Tiger, the American reaction was a dismissive hand wave, as Korean hip hop artists were mere imitators who never merited a serious consideration. Like, when did like again, it's all about not being cool. Him not being cool, his idols not being cool. Although Drunken Tiger, awesome. What? Um, I was that uncool black kid who was like, hey, listen to this East Asian hip hop I really love. And like absolutely people were like, okay, no. I wasn't cool because of it, but I didn't build like part of my identity on bitching that like it's unfair. Like if people don't find this music good, if they don't find it appealing, if they find it incredibly derivative, which it frequently is or has been, that's not a me problem. It shouldn't be a TK Park problem. Um Now the reaction is more often indignation. By attempting to import America's hip hop culture, they say, Korean hip hop artists are stealing African American culture. Some make this charge broadly to claim all of Korean hip hop is illegitimate. Some attempt to draw the boundaries more narrowly, arguing it may be fine for Koreans to rap, but not fine for Koreans to adopt hip hop's hairstyle, for example. Hold on. Let's look at the asterisks before I rip this shit to shreds. I find this argument strange because it ranks various elements of hip hop and considers some too integral to the African American culture to be appropriated, while others are not as important and therefore can be freely given away. If the point is to protect African American culture from being stolen, why is it okay for some elements for the African American culture to be stolen? I don't know how hard it is to get a job while black in Korea. Like I know a couple of English teachers like who've gone to Korea to teach English, and their reactions or their experiences are different. Dudes generally have less experiences with some of the weird shit, but black women in particular have talked about how their hair is like a focus for a lot of Korean people. Their hair is touched, pulled, talked about without their consent. So rap is something that physically most people can do. I can rap. It's hilarious. And my freestyling is basic for the moment, but I can rap. It's something that you can learn to do. But the hairstyle, a hair that so he frames it as a monolithic hairstyle, the hip hop hairstyle, right? But black people's hair is multifaceted. I mean, our styles are numerous. You have dreads, you have braids, you have cornrows, you have puffs. I mean, I could give you a list, but you probably wouldn't read it. And we are punished at every step of the way for having this hair. We're not punished for rapping, you fuck. We're literally not punished for rapping. So sharing something we don't get punished for that has already been established as something that everybody can figure out at some point or the other. I mean, Hamilton is huge, still, and that's a hip hop Broadway musical. So deciding that to be okay with some aspects of this cultural exchange. The one thing that we can share and share alike, because we're not punished for rapping as black people, but we are punished for having our natural hair out. We're punished for wearing our natural hairstyles. We are seen as unclean. We're seen as unworthy. We're seen as unhuman. Like TK Park, you lived in the US from 1997 and you have no idea how black people are treated, but you want to dismiss our choices on how to handle other cultures taking our hair and wearing it poorly, you know? Um, in either case, the underlying premise is the same. It is for Americans to decide exactly how Koreans may perform music, because Korean hip hop has no existence apart from the American kind. To paraphrase Edward Said poorly, Americans think they taught Koreans how to speak and think and perform music. And when Koreans rebel, they simply confirm Americans' views of them as silly children who did not yet reach the proper level of wokeness and political correctness. Eminem has had a career almost as long as I'm alive. Like, white rappers clearly are doing well, you know? Maybe it's because white rappers, for the most part, literally know that black people are people, possibly, and we're still not sure where Korean rappers fall on that scale. Most of the popular Korean rappers, I don't know, have ever actually engaged with, had relationships with, care about black people, as opposed to, ooh, culture I can take, ooh, raps I can repeat. Literally, this is the weirdest thing ever for him to kind of frame it as a situation of wokeness and political correctness, because it's not about that. It's about being resold our culture. It's about having him and Youngdae Kim not do the fucking hip hop thing and reference um the progenitors, the people who started this shit. He drops like a few names. They drop a few names in the article that they did, but it's like, and even with me understanding that edits happen, cuts get cut, you do not do a good job of drawing these connections between um, Black American hip hop artists and Koreans in Korea doing hip hop. And framing it as wokeness and political correctness, this just serves to diminish the actual conversations we're having about cultural appropriation. To be like, oh, isn't it silly? They think they can tell us how to be politically correct. Like the paternalistic shit he's accusing Americans, and again, Black Americans, of doing is what he's literally doing across the board. Here's section 4, or where I called someone to literally scream about his bullshit. So this is Kathleen Battle. Okay, she's an opera singer. So here he is trying to say that, like, he gets white musicians taking rock and roll and blackness and becoming successful, and then he compares it to, and so that's cultural appropriation. But he doesn't get why African American opera singers are not called cultural appropriation, because opera, the words I want to say, involves so much swearing, name calling. Ugh. But Black Americans deciding to be opera singers is not the same as white people being popular in rock and roll and erasing the origins of blackness. It is not the same as Koreans performing blackness in hip hop in the Korean hip hop scene or in their pop scene. Those three things are supremely different, with the latter two directly being cultural appropriation based off of an inherent disdain for and diminishment of Black creativity and a right to acknowledgement. So I haven't said this yet in this. I did say it in my article, but like, fuck you, TK Park. Fuck you. Fuck you. I have like 3 college degrees, and I literally do not understand what makes you think you even have the range to talk about this. Like, he's all, the dynamics between the people involved. Like he's not even saying, so he's like, no one thinks the latter is cultural appropriation. Clearly he does, because he's putting it in his article juxtaposed against the white hip hop, the white rock dudes, right? And so his whole thing is just fucking stupid. Sorry, I'm trying to minimize my language, but I literally can't even. It should be obvious that Korean hip hop is not at all like the case of rock and roll, and more like African American opera singers. Wrong. Ask yourself these questions. Can any number of K-pop acts displace the black pop music as it exists? Can you imagine a world in which hip hop is known by the name of and Jinusan and not by Tupac and Biggie? Would anyone ever think CL's success as a rapper threatens the stature of Nicki Minaj? I mean, CL is literally nowhere near as talented as Nicki Minaj, so duh. But as long as the genre of hip hop exists, no one will forget the African American artists who founded the genre, regardless of how successful their non African American progenitors may become. At most, Korean hip hop can only become a noteworthy variation of a genre rooted in the African American music tradition. It can never eclipse the existing history and become the genre itself. Like, yes, but that doesn't mean it's not fucking cultural appropriation. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't talk about what it means as Black people to see Korean artists literally appropriate Blackness and put it on as a costume. That doesn't mean that his article, where he doesn't really reference even Afro Koreans, is good. It doesn't mean that this article is fine. So here's where I literally had to stop repeatedly and fucking lose it. Like, this is the thing that gives me like agita. Fundamentally, it is not possible for Korean hip hop artists to appropriate African American hip hop because the power dynamics between the two groups clearly point in favor of African American hip hop artists. I hate him. I hate him. To the extent that African American hip hop is a part of American pop culture, and it clearly is, it takes a privileged position in Korea, as Koreans did not have a choice to be born into a world where American pop culture is not the aspirational standard. So, he can understand that Koreans didn't have a choice to be born into a US imperialism driven world, but not that Black people have no choice to be born into a world where our culture, our identities, our existence is chopped up piecemeal. We're removed from it and it's handed to people who don't fucking like us. Like, wow, so much privilege. I can go to Korea and have somebody shove their fucking hands in my hair. Wow. Oh my god. The only thing that a lot of many Korean people think of when they think of Black people is hip hop. But that's not a good thing. That's not a good thing. And that he tries to frame this hyper visibility that is super problematic as a good thing makes me want to scream. I've screamed enough about this. I'm not going to scream anymore. He also gives Tiger JK, Yoon Mire's husband and the godfather of Korean rap, um, privilege. He says that this dude has essentially privilege, right? Because he grew up in closer proximity with African Americans than Koreans in Korea. Meanwhile, Tiger JK knows that Black people are people. And I think that, again, with the white guys, it is that if you're doing a genre of music and you think the people who originated the music are subhumans and that you can do better, and that disdain is literally clear in how so many of these people, of these rappers, of these idols talk about Black people when they deign to talk about us, the way TK Park is talking about us, that I don't understand why he wrote this fucking essay. You know? Like the rest of K-pop, it took decades before Korean hip-hop began to settle into its own style, and that settling is still ongoing. You're damn straight about that last bit, but it's not really settling into its own style. But whatever. Here's the part I referenced in my essay where he bitches that, he claims it may be true that compared to whites, African Americans hold less power within American society. But as Americans who shape American pop culture, African Americans' power is incomparably greater than any non Americans, including Koreans. This is why, for example, the movie Black Panther depicts the fictional city of Wakanda much more vividly than the actually existing city of Busan. This is peak whataboutism. What about me? What about Koreans? What about Busan? And literally, his whole thing is Black people doing whataboutism in response to my article in Korean hip hop is wrong, but he is literally constantly doing whataboutism in reference to other things. Like, why aren't, what about Korean hip hop artists? Why aren't they rapping more? What about Korea? What about Busan? Like, just say you hate black people and go. Just go. Wait, nor does it make sense to point to anti-black racism in Korea. No doubt such racism exists. It is a healthy development that such racism is increasingly becoming to African Americans as Korean pop culture gains more exposure to the world, as it gives Koreans the impetus to cure their ignorance. But that is simply not relevant to the operation of the whole system based on the fundamental dynamics between American and Korean pop culture. This bitch. This bitch, y'all. Anti-black racism in Korea literally shapes the lives of black people who go to Korea to work and black people who are born in Korea and are living in Korea as Koreans. There are Afro-Koreans who have talked about dealing with racism from their people because they are not seen as part of that their people, you know? And that disdain for black people that is constantly present in Korean pop culture, from black facing idols and variety show hosts to, I mean, just fucking lots of blackface. I mean, that's pretty much like, what the fuck? Endless blackface. So you're gonna say that black people in America have privilege be I don't even get that shit. Black people in America have privilege because everybody wants to be us and they think that we're not people, and Korea has shit tons of blackface, mocking black historical figures and cultural figures. Like I saw that shit from that dude Super Junior in blackface dressed as Oprah. Like, ooh, we can't meet. It's gonna be on site for real because like I have to yell if I see him, you know. But like his understanding of privilege is wrong. What privilege is, how privilege works, how anti-blackness works. I will always be black. I can travel wherever the hell I want, you know, but I will always be black. If I go to Korea right now, if I go by myself, like, and I don't have a nice Korean friend or white friend who's an expat with me, I will not be safe. As in, I will have people like other black people who've traveled have talked about. I will have people touching, possibly even fucking licking my skin. I will have subject to racist statements, to people touching me without my consent, to if I decide for some fucking reason to live there despite knowing that like uh, anti-blackness is inescapable and universal, I will have trouble getting a job. I will have trouble finding love. I will have trouble if I, for some reason, have a child there, getting my kid into school. Like, the anti-blackness in South Korea absolutely should be brought up because it informs your ignorance, TK Park, about black people, and it informs your country's just ignorance about blackness. Oh, here's the other part where I screamed. Part 5. Um, I hate him. It frustrates me to no end when I hear the naive questions from Americans. Why don't Koreans develop a pop culture that is unencumbered by the American one? Why do Koreans play Western music at all when they have their own musical tradition? Why must they create hip hop music and wear football jerseys and style their hair like African Americans? Well, I hope your hair falls out. That's about that. It makes me want to shoot back. If you don't like Koreans putting their own touch to Western pop music and to hip hop, maybe you should have resisted the US imperialism. Maybe you should have stopped the Cold War before it began so that the United States, wouldn't have the chance to tell South Koreans that it is the angelic force that protects them from evil communists. Maybe you should have gotten America to stay the hell out of the Korean Peninsula instead of dividing it in half. Or, failing in that, maybe you should have gotten the US soldiers to listen to Korean music as it existed in the 1950s rather than having Korean musicians learn to play Elvis and James Brown. Fuck you, TK Park. Fuck you. Fuck you. I am black in a country that hates blackness. But more than that, I am black in a world that hates black people. US imperialism didn't just fuck your ridiculously ignorant ass over, it's fucking all of us over. And you're so salty that you weren't cool in 1997 when you tried to reintroduce, Americans to American music, but like in a language they didn't understand at the time. You've decided to just lean in on the anti-blackness. Bitch, if I get a time machine, no shit, I'm gonna go back in time and stop US imperialism because my ancestors were slaves and I would like that to not happen because I literally know people who've lost family members to just the horrific abuses of the United States government because the Klan, because I'm not a monster. What would you do if you had a time machine, TK Park? Would you go back and be like, 1997 folks, BTS is going to be really cool. So you guys are going to feel really bad for not liking me cuz that's all this is. I'm peak petty, but like at least I'm cute about it. All you sound in this whole thing is just sad. Like your grasp of history is weak. Your understanding of privilege is pathetic. Your engagement with Black American history is non existent. And your snideness, your condescension is unending. Unending. Um, you're a piece of shit, honestly. He concludes with Edward Said. Oh my god. Wow. And I went through a bunch of Edward Said quotes because I do own culture and imperialism and Orientalism, and because of my multiple college degrees, I literally have used his work repeatedly to talk about um, how we are influenced, how whiteness works, that sort of thing. And Edward Said has a really interesting point of view on like the role of the novel in imperialism that I thought was really useful, that I don't even think like that's kind of what um TK Park is trying to pull from here, but like I'm not reading this whole thing, but this quote, this block of text is literally not relevant to what he's writing. Like he thinks it is because he sees like the hybridizing intrusions of human history, and it's like no. That's like if Edward Said knew that you were using his works to be anti-black, he would like crawl out of his grave and bitch slap you. Just saying. um so if you've made it this far and you're not TK Park, please feel free to talk to me about this, because I think it's really like the whole thing with Korean hip hop and cultural appropriation is complicated. But people like TK Park make it really hard to have necessary conversations about anti Blackness, about cultural exchange, about what it means to be a person in this modern world, and what it means to be Black in a world that is explicit about wishing Black people didn't exist and that we knew our place. And TK Park wishes we knew our place as Black people. He makes that painfully clear across this essay. And it's been what, 8 months? I doubt anyone's really contested him that he cares about. Sure as hell isn't me. I blocked him the second I saw that piece of shit article. I'm gonna make sure I did. But it is wrong. Everything here is set up to be extremely anti-black, and I hate it, and I really wish that TK Park wasn't someone who people seem to listen to, because the anti-blackness on display here is horrifying in its ignorance and in its hatred. And he probably doesn't think he hates Black people. He probably has like a Black best friend like Jay Park does. But at the end of the day, the disdain influences everything he wrote. It is infused into his words, and it is obvious. And the cultural appropriation conversation with hip hop, with Black culture, is hard to parse for anyone. But he literally shouldn't have been having it, honestly.